Evening session organized by the Staff Association on one aspect of artificial intelligence. My own favorite way of thinking about artificial intelligence is that it's something done by a computer which you didn't think a computer was able to do. And our speaker today, Martin Smith, is going to tell us what computers or machines can do and perhaps what they can't do. And he's a very popular lecturer in Britain, but this is his first trip to Geneva. He is head of a robotics research group at the University of East London, and he's studied both physics and engineering, so he'll, I hope, be able to field questions from all of you, and I wish him good luck with this first talk in Geneva. Now you have to put that on your phone, and that in your...
Try not to trip over it. Thank you very much for coming, everybody. It's nice to see you all. It's delightful being in here in Geneva. I walked around the town yesterday for 5 hours, exhausting myself, and I've decided I want to live here now, so I have fallen in love with Geneva. Well, my talk is general interest, I hope, a little bit about where robotics is at the moment today, a little bit about future trends in robotics, computers, artificial intelligence, and a little bit of speculation about where that might lead us in the future. Because, of course, science fiction writers have been telling us for years that robots are going to be more intelligent than we are, and perhaps there might be some truth in that. Well, human evolution has come to an end. We are not going to evolve anymore. We are as intelligent as we're ever going to be. But robots and computers are evolving at an exponential rate, so perhaps they may overtake us. So let's see where robots are today. Well, here's a robot from Japan. Japan are the world leaders in robotics. The Americans may disagree, but I think most people wouldn't disagree. I could live with a bit less light if people could see more clearly. So that's a machine developed just to test the difficulty of walking upstairs, which is really rather difficult, especially for legged machines. But legged machines, of course, have the advantage that they can walk over delicate obstacles. Now, that machine, you may notice, has 2 TV cameras for eyes, and it has a couple of laser rangefinders so that it can measure how far away it is from objects in front, and 2 arms with 4 fingers on each arm. And because these things aren't quite as good as they might be, it has 4 heavy cables going up to the ceiling in case it falls on anybody. Here's another machine from Japan, and it illustrates one of the applications that the Japanese see for robotics. The main applications, of course, are areas of danger, such as nuclear power stations and in space and so forth, and areas where there's a lot of boring, repetitive work. But the Japanese see a possibility of robot guide dogs for the blind. And this is Meldog, or Meldog 4. It's made by the Japanese government, or the Ministry of International Trade and Industry. And Meldog has a head which rotates, and on that head are 19 sonar transmitter-receiver systems, and Meldog can find its way around a limited environment. So Meldog is given a map of the area that the blind person would like to be able to wander around, and enables the blind person to avoid bumping into obstacles and so forth. So each one of these little dots here is a sonar transmitter receiver, and sonar, of course, is sound, navigation, and ranging. There's a set on the side set of sonars on the side, and most of them, of course, on the front. Now, a MelDog can identify objects. It can recognize certain objects and indicate through the cable at the back to the user just what kind of obstacle they might have to avoid. This is a robot from America. There's a big argument about whether it's better to have tracked robots, legged robots, or wheeled robots, and roboticists come to blows over this. But this is, as you see, a robot which has 6 legs. And the idea behind this is the legs can move into very small profiles so that the robot can go through a narrow doorway, or the legs can spread over a large area so the robot can climb stairs, or as you see in this case, climb in and out of a pickup truck. So the robot weighs about 170 kilos and can run for about an hour on one battery charge. And that's a little bit old-fashioned now. That's from about 1983. One of the leading roboticists in America is a chap called Red Whittaker, and he works at Carnegie Mellon University, and he was asked to make a machine that would patrol inside the nuclear power installation at 3 Mile Island after they've had the accident. So here's a typical application for robotics, areas of great danger. And he was given, I mean, that's a very simple machine, strictly not a robot, but it gives some indication of the direction in which robotics is going. Having done that, Red Whittaker was given $1.5 million by the American government to make this robot. And this robot is called Dante, and Dante was designed to travel inside volcanoes. Now, the reason for doing this is volcanoes, of course, are dangerous, and if you know about volcanoes, or at least if you can measure the gases coming from a volcano, you can predict when the volcano is about to erupt. Now, shortly before this robot was built, 2 volcanologists had died trying to measure the gases in this volcano, so this was the reason for building this machine. The robot has 8 legs, and it can wander over 1-meter-high rocks. It has a laser rangefinder which can make an image of the inside of the volcano. It has 4 computers for navigation. It has a satellite link. So although this volcano is in Alaska, it can be operated from a safe distance, i.e. California. Unfortunately, this poor robot fell in. So it got down to 90 meters and then fell over and had to be rescued by helicopter. But it's a half-autonomous machine. It knows where to put its own legs, although the strategy of how it works comes from a long distance away. It has 8 video cameras and can walk down very great depths to do 3-dimensional surveys of the volcanoes. At the other extreme, robots can be made very small. As you may guess, this is somebody's thumb and forefinger measuring, indicating a robot that is following its way through a transparent pipe. And the idea is to be able to use robots to detect leaks in water pipes, and ultimately maybe to have robots that can go inside human beings' arteries and clean out the fur. And a little bit fanciful, but in principle, it's perfectly possible. So just at the front, you can just about make out 2 little pressure pads, which the robot uses to pull itself along the pipe, and at the back are the control cables, which enable it to move and attach to sensors. Another application, of course, of robotics is in the military. And the military are extremely interested in these sort of machines. This is a pilotless aeroplane. It's American. And just there is a forward-looking infrared receiver. It can scan. It's got a gyro-stabilized pan and tilt mechanism, so it can see in the dark and send the information that it sees back through a satellite transmitter to America or even the White House. So President Clinton, for example, could see whatever's happening in Bosnia or wherever, when he isn't otherwise occupied, of course. The pilot, this aeroplane knows exactly where it is because on this lump here is an aerial for a global satellite positioning system. And as you may know, the American government claim that will enable the aeroplane to know where it is anywhere on the surface of the globe to an accuracy of 20 meters. In actual fact, they are unduly modest. It's well under an accuracy of 2 meters anywhere in the globe. So that machine has a 50-foot wingspan. Sorry about the units, I don't have the brain to interpret in time. It weighs a ton, it has a range of 3,000 miles, and it will fly continuously for 40 hours. It has what's called synthetic aperture radar, which means it can use its radar to make a continuous map of the ground beneath it. And by comparing sequences of maps, it can produce very, very precise, accurate images by a technique which makes it look as if the aperture of the radar was very, very much bigger than it really is. It can take off and land by itself using inertial navigation system and the global positioning system. It's gyro-stabilized, it has infrared visible cameras, laser rangefinders. The American government have ordered 30 of these, of which 28 are left, 2 have been shot down over Bosnia. So they're being used now, and largely for SIGINT, as they call it, which is signals intelligence, or what used to be called spying. Another one from America, and this is made by the US Navy. It's called Robot, because the person who made it is called Bart, not Bart Simpson, of course, but another Bart. It has around the top of it 6 passive infrared detectors. It has 4 fixed sonar transmitter receivers at the bottom to help it avoid obstacles. The head rotates. It has 2 sonars on the head and 2 TV cameras. And you almost won't believe it, but that is a gun. It's called a Gatling gun, and a Gatling gun is a gun where the barrels rotate. And they say the gun is only loaded with tranquilizer darts and rubber bullets, but I'm sure it's only a matter of time before they take these things a little bit more seriously. At the top are laser scanning rangefinders. This is, again, American, but this is the American Army, because they don't cooperate too much with the American Navy, but there we go. So this is designed for the video motion detector of intruders. So in that head there is a gyro-stabilized pan and tilt vision system, which can, and inside the machine is a human recognition system. And that's to detect the intruders, Russian spies and so forth, and flooding and fires and so forth. And any information it acquires is sent back to base through that RF transponder at the top. It knows exactly where it is again, using the global positioning by satellite system, or GPS system. Well, those are some from America. I'll swap them back from country to country as it amuses me, but this one is from Australia. Now, let me assure you that this is in no way cruel. Although this sheep is alive and kicking and breathing and struggling, this is a sheep shearing robot, and the cutter has to follow the sheep's skin very, very accurately, of course, without cutting the sheep. and they got sufficiently good at it now that the sheep shearer actually is better at shearing sheep than the human operators. So it doesn't quite take off quite as much wool from the sheep as the human operators, but the sheep come off with fewer cuts and bruises when they are sheared by the machine. And that's from the University of Western Australia, and they've sheared well over 200 sheep by the time this picture was taken, and they've been so successful at sheep shearing that the human sheep shearers went on strike. Back to Japan, the Japanese are very interested in robots, and they're very interested in humanoid robots, and the Japanese government are putting a lot of money into what they call the humanoid project, and this was one of the first trials. It's difficult, it's not all that humanoid. These are the TV cameras for eyes there, so there's no necessity to put the cameras at the top, but anyway, it was a first attempt. This was made by Waseda University in Tokyo, and it was the world's first full-sized anthropomorphic or human-looking robot. Now that robot will talk in Japanese, it will walk, it can measure the range of itself from obstacles in front, it has eyes, ears, it can carry obstacles, the hands have tactile sensors in it, and the Japanese claimed a few years ago that that had the mental capacity of a 1.5-year-old child. But that was a few years ago. A more modern one, still made by Waseda in Tokyo, is Waybot, Waseda robot. And that's Waseda Robot 2. And he can, I think it's a he can read music. So at the top is a TV camera, and he's bolted firmly onto this white box here, which is the computer. That computer is programmed using artificial intelligence techniques so that the vision from the camera can be interpreted so that this robot can read music. Not only that, he has 5 fingers per hand, but those 5 fingers are rather more dexterous than human fingers in that they can move up to 15 times a second. So he can play musical instruments, keyboards, he can read music. He has what's called 50 degrees of freedom, which means he has 50 motorized joints in his hands, wrists, and arms. And to control those 50 degrees of freedom, he has 67 microprocessors. And here he is, playing the electronic organ, including using his feet on the stop pedals. So not only can he read music, he can converse in Japanese, which is more than I can do. Although I do know a bit of Japanese because I was taught karate and they only teach you in Japanese. But anyway, that's another matter. He can accompany a singer. So if somebody sings, he will choose a note and play an appropriate accompaniment to that singer because he can think fast enough to do that, if thinking is the right word. He has a repertoire of 16 tunes, and he can recognize voice commands, and he is sufficiently good that you can see a large-scale video display of his hands playing with the Japanese broadcasting company symphony orchestra. And he's quite a good musician because he can play air on a G string, which again is more than I can do. So that is by no means the state of art in robotics, because that was 1985, a long time ago. The latest Japanese robot in the humanoid project is one like this. Now, people have seen this picture before and assume there's a man inside there because they think Hollywood when they think robots. That is not so. That is a machine. It walks on 2 legs. It can climb stairs. It can turn on the spot. It cost $140 million to build, and it was made for publicity by the Honda Motor Company, which is why if you buy a Honda, they're expensive. Could we have the first bit of video, please? So I have to cover this, otherwise you can't see it. And this without sound, please.
The hardware robotic 80 is an all-in-one cleaning machine for hard floors.
Could you kill the sound? Thank you. Unfortunately, we could have a bit less light as well. I could be happy with less light, if you like. Not long ago, people were saying, well, robots will be far too dangerous to be used in the middle of the public. They're big, they're heavy, they're powerful. We mustn't do it. We must have safety-critical software. We must have committees deciding standards for safety-critical software. And no more than a year later than that, engineers were putting this in Hamburg Airport. This is made by Harco Werk in Germany. And you can just make out 5 sonar transmitters there and 5 more sonar transmitter receiver pairs there. And there's a few in the side. Inside that machine is a large water tank, and that water is sprayed onto the ground, and by the time the machine has passed, the water has been scrubbed and vacuumed up, and it could remove fairly large obstacles from the floor and give the floor a good cleaning. It works by looking for the longest parallel wall and walking parallel towards it. And here it is after it's followed some University of East London students. And more University of East London students. So that will go up and down, backwards and forwards, and every now and again people jump in front of it just to see how good it is at collision avoidance. And it works quite well at doing that. It will avoid collisions with humans, even though it's extremely heavy, because it has many gallons, many liters of water on board. The next video I show you, could we have the sound on for this, please?
Roscoe is a robot. He works as a porter in a hospital in Connecticut. Roscoe has a very small brain. He seems cleverer than he actually is because he's been indoctrinated with Bayesian logic. Whenever something unexpected happens, Roscoe searches his memory for an opinion, one of 1,500 put there by his designer, Dr. Joseph Engelberg. In addition, Roscoe is constantly updating his knowledge of the hospital corridors and what's in them. Going up and down in the lifts, doing 1,000 little chores for the nurses with his unflappable good humour, Roscoe is a popular figure around the wards. Thank you. Roscoe may look like a chest of drawers, but in fact he's a mobile embodiment of Bayes' theorem. Unexpectedly, he bumps twice into something which doesn't move. His memory tells him it's 90% likely he's hit, not an earth, but an inanimate object. In a very precise, numerical way, this then modifies Roscoe's view of this part of the hospital, as can be seen when he wanders by a little later. Even Bayesians aren't perfect. Roscoe would like nothing better than to stop and chat, but unfortunately, he has to hurry on.
Lucas Industries.
Could you kill the sound for this one, please? This is a promotional video, and being advertisers, the rest is to say this is the greatest thing since sliced bread and all that kind of stuff. There's not much engineering information. This is a research project done in the UK, but paid by European funding, And this car is controlled by this TV camera, which is just behind the rear view mirror. And the number plate in the front of the car contains behind it a radar. And the electronics are contained on this single card. And the combination of the radar and the vision gives it some very great power. So that's the real scene, and this is what the TV camera sees, and there's a certain amount of image processing. And behind this plastic window is the radar. Now that signal is the signal which is due to the speed of the car, and these various other signals are various other cars, and it can monitor the speed of 15 other cars around it simultaneously. The purpose of doing this is so when this guy puts his Led Zeppelin LP into the cassette player and wanders off into the traffic on the other side, a warning appears in the right-hand loudspeaker and tells him that he's drifting off to one side. So if he attempts to change lane, you see he's been warned there, if he attempts to change lane without signaling first, it'll stop him. Can you stop the video there for a moment? I'll come back to the exciting stuff in a minute. So what that system will do will avoid the car crashing into anything, crashing into other cars, crashing into obstacles. It will prevent the, if the car is overtaken and somebody overtakes you and then moves too close to you, it will put the brakes on, so it will stop you getting too close to the car in front for any given speed you have. And it will stop you changing lanes if you haven't signaled first. So it's a step to, and that's available now, so it's a step in a way towards sort of Big Brother driving cars. But I hope it never comes, because I drive Lotus Excels and far too quickly, and I would hate it if somebody else took over. But anyway, that's a direction where things go. So that's some of the applications that are current. What's happening is research is going on, and this research is leading somewhere. And the research largely is being done on machines like this. This is made by the Nomadics Corporation in California, and it costs $53,000. And it's an autonomous mobile robot and used by artificial intelligence research groups around the world. Years ago, artificial intelligence meant you'd get the biggest computer you could, get the most software writers you could, write the biggest program, and the best artificial intelligence people wrote the most lines of code and so forth. The trend now is to think in terms of starting with simple machines, worms, ants, and so forth, and making machines a little bit more intelligent in the way that human intelligence evolved. So, the first thing you have to do if you are a life form, an early life form, is to be able to wander around, avoid bumping into things, making a little map of the world you're living in, and run away from predators. And one way to do experiments along those lines is to buy a robot like this. Well, it can turn on the spot, so in the technical jargon of the field it's called non-holonomic. It has synchro drive, which again simply means it's got three-wheel drive with three-wheel steering, so it can translate and rotate simultaneously. It can carry out 20 million instructions a second. It has 20 tactile sensors, 16 infrared sensors, 16 sonar sensors. These discs here are gold-plated plastic, and they are ultrasonic ranging systems from the Polaroid camera, a ranging camera that you may have come across. It has two-dimensional laser, so you can just make out a laser scanning beam there, and the TV camera looks down on any reflections from the laser scan. It has, as well as the television, it has a compass, an electronic compass inside. It has a radio frequency modem, so any data can be transmitted back to a desktop using that aerial, and it has some limited speech as well. So, it also has light-emitting diodes for range finding. And for any electrical engineers that in the audience, you may know that if you connect a light-emitting diode around the wrong way, it becomes a dark-emitting diode. Or sometimes we call it a dead, because it doesn't work anymore. But anyway, sorry about that. That's just for electrical engineers who've done the sin of connecting diodes the wrong way around. Anyway, although this is $50,000 and is very reliable, very accurate, very well behaved, and with all these systems for avoiding bumping into things, it still has two very large rubber bumpers and an emergency stop switch. This is from the UK. These two little devices, which I've got a bit of a video showing in a minute, are from the University of Reading under the cybernetics research group run by Professor Kevin Warwick. He calls these the 7 dwarfs, even though there's only 2 of them here. In actual fact, there are 25 of them, but nevertheless, they are very interesting. They have a little ultrasonic transmitter there and 2 receivers, ultrasonic transmitter, 2 receivers. And at the top, there is an infrared transmission and reception system. All these 7 dwarfs or 25 dwarfs are identical, and they can all talk to each other. And so if this one, for example, gets stuck in a corner, it can tell all the others through its infrared transmission link that it's stuck, and the others can say, well, we're not stuck, why don't you follow us? So what will happen is that these robots can form a flocking behavior, that is, they can follow one another, they can behave rather like ants behave and mice behave and so forth. And they use these for experiments in the behavior of ants. The other thing that's interesting about them is that they are not controlled by conventional digital logic. They are controlled using neural networks. The early ones had neural networks consisting of 50 neurons, which is 50 copies of a human brain cells. The modern ones have 500 neurons, and even though a human brain has 10,000 million neurons, and these only have 500, it's interesting to see that they can produce some relatively intelligent behavior, some surprisingly intelligent behavior which is not programmed into them. So Kevin Warwick has written a very interesting book recently on this subject, featuring these machines. He's called it The March of the Machines. I can recommend it to you. In the book, he suggests that by the year 2020, robots will be more intelligent than humans, and that if we are lucky, they will keep us as pets. If we are unlucky, which is what he suggests, that they will treat us in the same way we treat veal and beef and so forth, and that we can expect to be farmed and generally used as factory fodder, and our lives are going to be ever more miserable, and we should be very careful about research in robotics. Well, my view on that book, and we've done some television interviews where we argue with each other, I have suggested that for collectors of rare books, I recommend the unsigned edition. Now, that's a very cruel joke, but Kevin Warwick is such a nice guy, and he knows I do that one, so that's okay. This is another aspect of this kind of research in walking machines. It's quite easy to make a 6- or 8-legged walking machine, And so that was one of the first things robots research departments did. This is one that was made in Japan and is now sold around the world for use in artificial life and artificial intelligence research. But if you want to start with one of these, it'll cost you $11,000. It has whiskers as bump sensors. It has 5 infrared sensors at the front. It has 3 infrared sensors at the rear, various light sensors, and it has a simple behavior. It can avoid obstacles and wander around looking for food, food being anything that's warm. We're doing similar things in the UK, albeit at a much lower level than Japan and America, and a lower level, I suspect, talking to the people from EPFL, lower level than Lausanne, but never mind. They seem to be doing some very good work. This comes from Salford University in England, and from a research group run by a chap called Dave Barnes, another very nice guy. It is a 6-legged walking machine, and each of these little black blobs here is a servo motor as taken from his son's radio-controlled car, I think. So with 12 of those, you can make each leg move up and down and backwards and forwards. Each pair of legs is controlled by a transputer, which is a very expensive microprocessor with built-in memory and communications. So there's a transputer there, and another one there. There are 2 more servo motors at the front used to scan the area. So the whiskers are just moved backwards and forwards with these servo motors, and when it bumps into something, it just turns around and runs away. It can be done much more simply than using transputers to lift and move the legs. It's sometimes been suggested that using a transputer to move a servo motor is rather like using a bulldozer to peel a potato. But I try and insult everybody if I can, so if there's anybody I haven't insulted by the end of the program lecture, please put your hand up and I'll try and think of a suitable insult. Also from Salford, from Dave Barnes's group, is an experiment in cooperative robots, and the idea behind this program is that there is another identical robot to this at the other end of this plank. So if you had to carry something awkward like a large beam or a large steel joist around a factory, you'd need to have 2 robots cooperating. So they would not only have to be able to avoid obstacles for themselves, but they would have to be able to avoid all the obstacles that the plank might move into, and they might have to move the plank in some strange path in order to avoid vertical obstacles and horizontal obstacles. This is an American base made by Real World Interfaces, and they are very expensive. And these holes there are designed to incorporate the ultrasonic transmitter receivers that you saw on the other ones, which are $60 each. But because we're a British research group, we can't afford that, so that's why you see empty holes there. We don't have the sort of money that CERN has. Didn't think that would go down very well. But not only are British research groups so poor, even when we can fill the holes with ultrasonic transmitter receivers, we cannot afford the $60, so we make our own, which are about 20 centimes each. And even we can't even afford that to fill in all the holes. Isn't that sad? Anyway. The 2 robots are called Fred and Ginger. We have to have names for robots. That's essential. First law of robotics, give your robot a name. A lot of robotics in England is based on buying American bases. They're very heavily sold in the UK, and the salesmen seem to think these are the greatest things since sliced bread. Which sometimes makes me think, I wonder what was the greatest thing before sliced bread, but that's another matter. Anyway, they are so good. They are the greatest advanced in robotics research the greatest achievement in intellectual endeavor since Coca-Cola invented the six-pack. This is another robot from the UK, and this is Robug, and it's made by Portsmouth University. And Robug is financed by the nuclear industry because nuclear industry have a lot of cables and pipes along the floor, and they need machines that can climb over these things. So that's funded by Nuclear Electric. The legs are powered by compressed air. It has 10 16-bit microprocessors to decide where the legs should go, so it decides that for itself. It has an Apple Mac which controls the navigation, and a 486 PC for the overall coordination of the legs. It'll carry 100 kilogram loads, so it's quite a substantial machine. It will carry people on that. Could we have the next section of video, please? Well, this is something we do partly in research and partly in teaching. This is a predator-prey pair of robots from the International Robot Olympics that was held in Glasgow in 1996. This is the Salford University robot that I told you about, the six-legged walker. It has to have a certain amount of computing off-board, which is a shame, and it doesn't walk too nicely, but never mind. It's quite a nice machine. Now, because this is a promotional video and nobody has an attention span more than 15 seconds, they had to keep interlapping bits. This is Portsmouth's wall climbing robot. This is an amateur-made robot. You can just about, it's powered by rubber bands, and you can just about make up a Coca-Cola bottle there, which is filled with compressed air. And that walks rather better than the Salford one, which rather embarrassed Salford. Now, this is from Robot Wars, which of course could only come from America and could only come from San Francisco when you think about it. Now, this has a tuned 250cc motorcycle engine inside. That disc is doing 7,000 RPM. That's Kevlar. You can buy this now. This is a solar-powered lawnmower. This is a one-legged hopping robot from Mark Raybert's research lab in America. Try not to blink. Keep your eyes open. I think these are really cute. They are pneumatically powered, telescopic legs. The power comes off-board and the controller's off-board. This is Edinburgh University attempt at a pan and tilt and convergence human head. And these are some of the robots we use in teaching students robotics. This is from Staffordshire University in the UK, the idea being to help disabled people or people who won't eat their brown mousse or don't like chocolate mousse, have to be force-fed chocolate mousse. And of course, now this machine is being used in TV commercials in Britain, in the UK, to advertise British nuclear fuels to show how clever they are. What they have done is bought a robot from America. But the interesting thing about this machine is that the gripper moves in a perfectly straight line, even though all these joints are moving at very hard to calculate angles. So the computation for calculating these angles to make that gripper move in a perfectly straight line is quite significant. Partly because it has to allow for the fact that gravity changes the situation as it moves along. This is a contest, a competition, which we use to teach students, and it's to make a mouse reach that point there, which is a goal, which is in the center of a 256 square maze. So there's the goal. There are 256 squares like that. That one is made by MIT. There are three classes. One where you have to make the microprocessor so it's self-controlled, autonomous. Another class for school children where they can be controlled by an umbilical cord from a PC. And this one is worked simply on microswitches for even younger children. And some people have a bit of fun with putting ears and mice on it. And that's what you win, a large chunk of cheese and a free trip to America to join the competition. The competition is very popular in Japan, New Zealand, Taiwan, Singapore, Australia, and to some extent the UK. I'm trying to make it more popular in the UK. It's been going for many, many years, this competition. So the robot has to make a mental map of the maze, get to the center in the shortest possible time. That stands for Fairly Reliable Electronic Device, Fred. The world record to map the maze is about 20 seconds, and the shortest time that anybody's achieved to get back to the start is about 7 seconds. To design the microprocessor and the electronics and the sensors and the power drivers, to do all that is a fairly significant project. 20 years ago it was impossible, and nowadays it's an undergraduate student project. The faster mice and ours, and that one's not ours. Ours is the fastest university mouse in the UK, which is why I was invited to do this program. That's MIT's mouse. The best mice, of course, are able to solve that maze faster than any human being will ever be able to solve a maze. That's David Otten from MIT. He's the world champion at the moment. He's paid full-time by MIT to beat the Japanese. That is a very secret machine, but I can show you a little bit about the predecessor to that machine. Can you cut the video at that point, please? Thank you. Unfortunately, when people see small robots, they think of them as toys. In actual fact, there's an awful lot to them. This is the predecessor to that mouse. This was the world champion mouse last year, made by MIT. Now, looking at that, you think, oh dear, they've bent the wheels. No, they haven't. This mouse, as it's called, has four-wheel drive and four-wheel steering. That funny-looking yellow surface there is a special compound of rubber which has a maximum degree coefficient of friction with the surface of maize we use. Because the acceleration of this machine is so great and the braking is so great, there is a danger that if you were to measure how far it's gone using the power wheels, that false data, wheel slip would put false data into the memory of how far it's gone. So what he's done is used two idler wheels just for odometry, just for measuring the distance traveled. So this wheel measures how far the left-hand side has traveled, and there's another wheel on the other side to measure how far the right-hand wheel has traveled. Inevitably, of course, this machine is not only four-wheel drive, four-wheel steering, it has anti-lock brakes, and it has traction control, which means it limits its own acceleration in order to avoid wheel slip. It can cut corners, and it doesn't have to do right angles or do curves. Now, our mouse solves the maze by having one sensor in front, which detects the wall in front, one sensor on the right to detect the right-hand wall, one sensor on the left to detect the left-hand wall. This is not good enough for MIT. That has 144 sensors instead of 3. 36 there, 36 there, 36 there, and 36 there. So what this mouse can do is not only detect where the walls are either side of it, it can detect walls in adjacent lanes, and so can feed in 3 lots of data into its microprocessor simultaneously. Now, David Otten couldn't get a microprocessor fast enough with a sufficient input and output, so he used an engine management control chip from a V8 engine. Very, very serious, they take these things. Very, very serious. Nevertheless, our mouse is, well, much slower, but it's a little more intelligent, oddly. What we've programmed our mouse to be able to do is to be able to work out what the fastest route around the maze is without having to search the whole maze. So it only needs to search about 70% of the maze before it can be about 95% certain that it's got the fastest possible path. Now, no human being could do that. No human being is intelligent enough to do that. No human being will ever be intelligent enough at maze solving as our mouse, and our mouse is just a final year degree student project. So it's all downhill from now because I'm going to show you some of our work. Well, these are student projects from the University of East London. This, of course, first rule has a name, and the name is Tiny Tim. Tiny Tim is about a 1-inch cube. I'm sorry about units, we're still very old-fashioned in the UK. We have a proverb which is, if you give somebody something, they'll try and take more, which is if you give him an inch, he'll take a mile, which should be if you give him 25.4 millimeters, he'll take 1.6 kilometers. But it doesn't translate too well. Anyway, Tiny Tim, you can get some idea of the size, is about 25.4 millimeters across, give or take 0.4 of a millimeter. Those are watch batteries there on the top, so you can get some idea of the size. And these are little whiskers, which he bumps into things, and he makes, in his memory, a mental map of where he's been. He has 2 little light detectors for eyes. And what he does is, if it gets very dark, he runs away from dark areas. He runs away from very bright areas. He looks for areas which have medium average brightness. And when he finds an area which is evenly bright all around, he does a little dance. He spins on the spot. And for each one of those 5 behaviors, he sings a little song. So he's very popular on the radio. His bigger brother is a little more intelligent in that he doesn't have to bump into things in order to make a map of the world. He uses ultrasonic transmitter and receiver instead of using whiskers to bump into things. As far as we know, that's the smallest autonomous mobile robot made in the UK. But it's not as good as some of EPFL's robots, which I've just seen today. But so we're not beating you guys yet, but that's the best in the UK at the moment. This is another student project from the little group I pretend to run when I'm not enjoying myself visiting Geneva. And this is a 6-legged walker. 6-legged walkers are interesting because they're the easiest type of walker you can make, because you can make 3 legs stable and then you can lift 3 more legs and put those and make it stable. So a 6-legged walker is the easiest type of walker to make. And these are cheap because these are radio-controlled servos. The slightly interesting thing about this machine is that these servo motors make each leg move up and down, backwards and forwards randomly in amplitude, randomly in frequency, and no particular phase relationship between them, just moves them around randomly. And at the front is an ultrasonic transmitter and receiver, so the robot can measure how far away it is from something. And if it finds itself moving towards its source of food, its battery, another battery, it remembers the random sequence of leg movements that enabled it to move forwards, and it forgets all the previous useless leg movements. So this machine teaches itself to walk. Now, years ago, people said, well, robots, computers, they can't be intelligent. They can't be any more intelligent than their programmer. They can't learn, can they? And of course, now we're making machines that can learn, and now students, just for fun, are making machines that can learn. This is another one of our little machines that learns. So this is a four-legged walking machine which keeps its legs vertical by using a parallelogram linkage. And that works out that it cannot lift a leg until it's made its own center of gravity sit between the positions of the other three legs. So it has to move sideways as it walks, and so it walks as if it's drunk. So it gets all sorts of funny names from the other students, some of which I won't tell you. One of the robots that got us on television a lot was this one. So I'm sufficiently foolish that I will do live television with robots, and that's fairly unusual in the UK. And when you make a robot like this, which is 6'6" high and weighs about 100 kilos and is solid welded steel, the media tend to take notice. Now, at the top are two TV cameras, those things there, and they can move left and right and up and down, and they can converge. And you can just about, I hope, make out two lasers. And the lasers are fitted to the cameras. So when the two laser spots converge on one spot, the TV cameras can recognize that. And from the angle of convergence of the two TV cameras, the robot can work out how far it is that that laser spot has landed on whatever object it has decided to land the spot on. Now, of course, because we are terribly poverty-stricken in the UK, and particularly in my university, we cannot afford the $60 Polaroid ultrasonic transmitter receivers, so we just have three. But what we've done is we've mounted them on scanners so that this robot can see 180 degrees in front of it. And we have another laser scanner in there. And each of these bumpers have microswitches, so it can make a map of the world either by video or by using the laser or by using the ultrasonic system. Now, most of the robots I've shown you before, for example, the Japanese Meldog is given a map. Somebody goes, and the robot nurse, somebody goes around the hospital or goes around the area with a tape measure, with angles and so forth, makes up a map and digitizes that and puts that in the robot. We think of that as cheating. We want the machine to make its own map. So this machine makes its own map of the world and wanders around in that world. And the idea behind this machine is that it is a robot night watchman. So the idea is it wanders around the research lab, making a map of the research lab and wandering around and taking video images of what it sees. There is a radio modem at the back, so the radio images, the television images are digitized and transmitted from the laptop computer, which is in there, to a desktop computer, which is on my research assistant's desk. Now, the idea is that we can use several of these machines, which of course can transmit the video information anywhere in the world using the internet. Now, we called it a robot night watchman, and the student wanted to call it Elizabeth, but as soon as the media saw it and said, oh, a robot night watchman, we have to call it RoboCop. So what happened was, the media said, oh, we must see RoboCop, will you do a film of us? And most robotics researchers in the UK are too intelligent to do live TV. They'll say, all right, if it's recorded, or they say no media at all. But I'm not that clever. I said, yes, that'll be lovely, we'll do TV. And my next video is the disaster, which was the result. Can you play the video, please? So the video is of a slightly earlier version of this, but we haven't done one since. Oh, can I have the sound?
Robocop, especially designed to deal with mobile traffic. And this is the brainchild of Martin Smith from the University of Eastern. Just tell me a few things that Robocop has that I don't.
Well, it has two lights, which are TV cameras, which are infrared, which see in the dark. Two lasers, which work as range finders.
That's just the distance from the robot.
That's right. And it has ultrasonic transmitters and receivers, which scan looking for objects and obstacles.
Okay, that's got a group here that seems to be going in and out. Okay, fine, Robocop, just run on. So why would this be better than, say, having security cameras?
If it was a big, complicated building, you'd have to have hundreds of cameras, whereas this can control a whole building with just 2 cameras. And you can send the information back to a central control. So you can have dozens of these patrolling dozens of buildings.
And it can operate in the dark?
Yes.
Alright, then. Okay, so go find Nick, collar him. He's outside the studio, Robocop. How does it find his way around?
It has to plan a path.
Right.
It has to work out from its sonar sensor signals where all the walls are, where all the obstacles are, and find the shortest possible path between each of the obstacles.
Alright, so let's have a look at what he might see there.
Well, at the top in the middle is the robot, and as it scans around, it produces the pink areas, which are the walls and obstacles, and it remembers the path it's been in, that line is the path it's travelled on, and gradually, when it's found all the walls and all the obstacles, when it's got a complete map, it stops and says, now I know the complete map of the building.
Okay, well let's put that to the test. Because Robocop is outside the studio now where we keep all of our props and mess. Speaking of mess, Nick is hiding there somewhere.
You're going to take me alive, come on. Actually, it's all to the money. So they're going to find me. Let's have this camera, I beg you. Right. If I go and watch sport, the network, I'm never going to get caught. Well, you can never get through, is it actually anyone? Maybe for us. There's an edge. Right, I'm off. Because the worry is that this is probably being recorded on this little whiteboard for being fed to some security breaks or even straight back to the police. Maybe it could even be used in evidence afterwards. I'm going to try to escape from it around here. Oh, grief, still there. Where's it going to go? I've got time. I've got nowhere. I wonder, can I interest you in some cash perhaps, sir?
Thank you. Could we have the lights, please? Well, the reason that doesn't look the disaster it was because, like all these things, it worked beautifully in the rehearsals. But what they didn't tell us was that when they really do the program, they switch on 3 megawatts of light, and every single individual in the production team has a radio microphone. And that picked up every frequency used in radio microphones in the UK. That weighs 70 kilos, solid steel. 5 minutes before the program was due to go out, they switched on the microphones and it went straight for the audience. It was absolutely terrifying. It was fascinating to watch the blood drain from the face of the producer, the director, the floor manager, the sound man, Carol Vorderman, who I'm in love with. I think she's the most gorgeous woman. Anyway, that's I can say that because my wife can't hear me from here. It was absolutely terrifying. So what we did was we ripped out every single long wire that wasn't associated with the controller and the path planning, and about 30 seconds before the program was due to go out, it worked. It was very, very lucky. So they have a saying in the media in the UK, never work with animals and children. They now have a new saying, never work with animals, children, and robots, or Martin Smith. I'll say a quick few words about how it's done, how we do this. A Of course, for a machine to be intelligent, it doesn't have to have the same reality as we have. And it doesn't have to think the same way as we have in order to be better at us at any behavior. So we have only a tenuous grasp of reality, and this has a different reality. And reality is important, and it's important to understand the importance of reality and virtual reality. But the reality that the robot sees is shown in this example. So the first thing it has to do is plan a path, and I've given an example here of 3 obstacles and a goal. So what the robot does is it divides its world into squares, and it allocates for each of those squares a score, and the score is proportional to the probability that there's an obstacle in the square. And the probability is the height of this line here. So when we give the robot a 0 score, we say that means that it is certain that there is no obstacle there. Therefore, that is the safest place on the board to be. Then we tell the robot to scan the area around it and take averages of the probabilities of all the squares in your local area. And that's what's happened here. The height of the obstacles around the goal, the height of the unknown squares around the goal have been averaged. Now when the scan expands further to include the obstacles have give a high score because they indicate a high probability that there's an obstacle there. This is one of the problems of sensors. You can never be sure there's an obstacle there because sensors are so unreliable, so we work on probabilities. So high probability of an obstacle, a goal is there, which we give a low probability, and then we tell the robot all it has to do is follow the path of steepest descent. So wherever the robot is in that world, it will follow the path of steepest descent. Now that has the advantage that it is the safest path because it is the path between 2 obstacles, the midway path between the 2 obstacles, which is the safest path. It has the other advantage that it is also the shortest path, which is the one you'd expect an intelligent machine to take, and the one that saves the batteries. Now this is the first and last equation, I promise you. For those of you who, a few young people here who I hope will not give up mathematics, all the words I have given you can be shortened down to that equation. So it may look horrible, but robots understand it, and mathematicians understand it, and it's a very nice shorthand for a set of instructions. So what we say is we're going to give the goal a score of 0, and by giving any unmapped area where we don't know whether there's an obstacle or not, we give that a score of 0 as well. What the robot does is it explores everything. So any unknown area is explored. So this formula, this algorithm, not only makes the robot make a map of the area, and map making is an important part of artificial intelligence, an important part of life, it also forces the robot to plan the path using the same algorithm, and that's the novelty of that. So I won't overload you with that kind of stuff, but just tell you what we're going to do next. We're going to make one of these. Now, this is an engineer's view of what a human being is. And of course, we just have 5 sensors, 5 external sensors, a few internal sensors. We have a brain, and anthropologists tell us that our brain is, in effect, divided into 3 parts. The first part, they call the reptile brain, which is from way back in our evolution, when all we were able to do was do very simple things like eat, reproduce, and deal in some way with predators, which was either to fight the predator or to run away for it or freeze and pretend you're dead. More recently in our evolutionary history, we have developed what they call the ancient brain, which has good survival properties of being able to do prediction and planning. So if I store the food for next summer or something like that. Most recently in our evolutionary history, we've developed what they call the recent brain, with the ability to do abstract thought, and very importantly for us, language, and also very importantly, self-control. And of course, it's that bit that goes if you've had too much red wine for your dinner. Or in my particular case, too much whiskey. And that is the main interest of my research, the effect of too much whiskey on self-control. The results so far, I have to confess, are inconclusive, so I'm continuing the research. Unfortunately, the results are also incoherent, but never mind. I'm making progress. But the government are so mean, they won't fund that part of my research. The output of our brains just go to muscles. Everything we do is just muscle control. We have nothing else. But a very important part of human activity is feedback. The ability to be able to see where our muscles move and how they move and control the movement. Now, the problem with humans is that feedback path is very slow. It's roughly, the signals traveling down that feedback path are roughly 1 meter per second. Now, if we wanted to make a robot, and of course robots are nothing like humans, are they? That feedback path, which is crucial, is able to operate at about 300,000, 3 times 10 to the 8, 300 million meters per second. So a very key part of robotics is the feedback path, and robots will be 300 million times faster than humans. Not only that, robots aren't stuck with only having muscles. They have 4 types of outputs: motors, solenoids, pneumatics, hydraulics. Not only that, robots have many more sensors than we have. Robots can have TV cameras for eyes. Now, human eyes are not that good. We think they're excellent, but TV cameras can see colors we cannot see. They can see in the dark. They can see brighter objects than we can see. Microphones are much better than human ears. All we can hear is 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, a tiny, tiny fraction of the sound spectrum. These sensors here, well, lasers don't appear in nature. Radar doesn't appear in nature, and the global positioning satellite system doesn't appear in nature. But robots can have those. Of course, magnetic sensors appear in nature. Bees have them. Sonar appears in nature. Bats have them. So robots can have all these extra sensors. So human beings will never have extra sensory perception, but robots will. Our consciousness depends on how good our sensors are. The more sensors you have, the more conscious you can be. So, what about the next bit left? The brain. Well, we've got this. We've achieved path planning, mapping, collision avoidance. No problem. The next level is simple behaviors. Well, robotics have got simple behaviors, but not too far. The top bit is strategy, which we haven't got to. So everything else, robots are better at, except that bit at the top. So what are the trends? Well, it's processing power, and here are the trends in processing power indicated. Now, this is a simplistic view to start with. This is a plot of the number of devices, let's say transistors on a microprocessor, plotted against the year. And we see very rapid growth because this is 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. What is happening is extraordinarily rapid growth in computing power, exponential growth. And there are limits to that, but there are new technologies on this coming along which will keep that growth probably for at least the next 50 years. You may have heard of Moore's law. Gordon Moore, the director of Intel, pointed out that, I'm sorry this is too faint, isn't it? Maybe a bit less light would do it. I could live with less light if you like. There is a straight line, roughly, through those points. There are three sets of points. Intel microprocessors, there's a straight line through there. Motorola microprocessors, there's a straight line through there. And memory size, straight line through there. On this axis is exponential increase. These are 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. And this is 1970 going up to the year 2000. So what we have there is that in 30 years, from 1970, the effect has been we've had a 10 times growth in computer capability every 4 years. That's a doubling every 2 years. And so we now have a situation where the complexity of a microprocessor, that is the, if you were to look at the tracks on the, under a microscope, the number of routes on there are now more complex than the road map for every road in the world. So one microprocessor has a complexity greater than the road map of the entire world. We are moving towards 100 million transistors per integrated circuit. If this continues, we will have more transistors on an integrated circuit than there are brain cells in the human brain. Not only is the number of transistors increasing in a microprocessor, but the capability of the transistors are increasing. Now, this is the number of instructions that a computer can carry out per second in millions. So there's 100 million instructions a second. There is 1,000 million instructions a second by the year 2000. This is an amazingly rapid growth. It's almost unheard of in science, any kind of technology. So Gordon Moore of Intel said, if we had cars that had improved at that rate, you would be able to buy a Rolls-Royce for 1 centime, and it would do 10,000 miles an hour on 1 ounce of petrol throughout its life. And that is a reasonably accurate parallel. But, of course, General Motors then came back with the argument, and yes, well, what would happen if word 6 broke down 3 times a day? But anyway. So we have the realistic prospect, the almost certain prospect of 1,000 million instructions per second by the year 2000, and that's a 10 times increase in speed in 8 years, combined with 1,000 times cost reduction in 20 years. Now, if you were to combine that massive growth in transistor computer power with the massive growth in the number of computers in the world, and just also exponential, and combine that with the growth also exponential of the number of computers you can connect together, which are connected together, what you have is something along the lines of a world brain. Something which is so powerful that it can now decode secret government codes that were considered impossible to be decoded in thousands of years, are now being decoded by a few hackers on PCs by connecting them together. So what's going to happen? Are we going to be able to make a robot that would be considered intelligent, conscious, a machine that would have a mind, or even a machine that can be considered alive? Well, let's look at the properties of intelligence. Well, philosophers have been deciding, or trying to decide, or debating what intelligence is ever since the days of Plato and Aristotle. And of course, being philosophers, they haven't got anywhere. They haven't had the advantage that engineers have been able to tell them things that magnetic resonance imaging scanners can tell them, positron emission scanners can tell them, and so forth. But what is certain about intelligence is it is some function of processing speed, massively increasing, far faster than humans, at least in serial terms. Memory, which is getting very close to human memory now, within orders of magnitude. Knowledge, well, more precisely information. If you were to take the two of the world's largest libraries, digitize them, put them on the internet, perfectly possible by modern standards, any robot connected to the internet would have access to the sum total of human knowledge. Any intelligent system has to have inputs because it needs to be able to experiment with the world. It has to have outputs in order to do the same thing. And it must have complexity. You cannot have a machine which is simple. So where's this going to lead us? How a machine is going to keep up with biology? Well, this is what biology has been doing. This is a sample of some representative life forms on the planet, all the way from man, right at the top, to bacteria at the bottom. And what I've plotted here on this vertical axis is the number of cells of different types in each organism. So, for example, in humans, we have 250 different types of cell. We have hair cells, skin cells, liver cells, kidney cells, heart cells, brain cells. 250 different ones. Bacteria only have 1 or 2 different cells. Sponges have a few more, maybe 10 different cells. Along this axis here is, in effect, the complexity of each cell. So in actual fact, it's a scientific measurement. For those who are interested, what I've done is plotted the number of grams of DNA in each cell. So there is a relatively small weight of DNA, a relatively simple cell for bacteria. And of course, the most complex life forms on the planet, man, has rather more DNA in each of his cells, or her cells. The interesting thing, perhaps, is that in going from bacteria to sponges, we have 10 times the complexity. Jellyfish are 10 times as complex as sponges. The cells of humans are 10 times as complex as jellyfish. As a first, rough, approximate engineering estimate, human cells are 10 times 10 times 10, 1,000 times more complex than bacteria. But, of course, we have 250 times as many different cells. So as a rough engineering estimate, humans are 250,000 times as complex as bacteria. Not a huge difference, not an excessively large number. This is sort of numbers that engineers are used to dealing with, factors of 250,000 to 1. It's taken 3.5 billion years to get from there to there. But that's by random selection, natural selection, by being eaten by saber-toothed tigers and so on. Robots are here, and they've taken 50 years. 10 years to go from there? No. Well, more than that, but you could get some idea, all right? We are not as complex as we like to think. Robots are much more complex than we like to think. One thing of dealing with robots is you learn a lot of respect. Trying to make a robot that does something intelligent, you learn a lot of respect for biology, a lot of respect for human beings, but you must also learn, you also get, or at least I have, a lot of respect for machines. There's another interesting thing about this, is that the amount of information in our DNA is not very large. It's 3 times 10 to the 9 bits of information, about the same amount of information as in a videotape or a CD-ROM or a CD. The other thing that's interesting is, although we have a lot of cells within us, we start off as one cell, which doubles to 2, which doubles to 4, which doubles to 8, and that only happens 32 times. We only have 32 generations of cell doubling before we get to where we are. I'm of such a weight, perhaps I have an extra generation, I'm not quite sure. So that is the story of evolution on this planet, the biggest story of sex and violence ever told. So how long is it going to be before we get one of these? Well, science fiction writers have been very accurate in many cases and very inaccurate in others. If you have an enormous budget, then you can just put a man in a metal suit and say, we have a robot. If you don't have quite such a big budget, you can just put some talcum powder on the man's face and say, we have a robot. But although some of these predictions have been very interesting, very accurate, for me, the saddest prediction of all is that in 500 years' time, they still haven't got a cure for baldness. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to take any questions that you have. But I shall also be not upset if you have trains to catch or planes to catch, so please.
No more trains today. If you ask a question, please press the little button so that your question can be recorded, because we are recording and filming this one. So, any questions? We have one up there.
Please.
Okay, press your little button.
How do you compare a robot to a worm?
Robots to a worm?
Yes, you said they were on the same level.
Right. In this particular case, I was comparing it in terms of complexity. That is, the number of cells and the complexity of the cell. But you could equally compare on the basis of behavior. So my greater interest is to compare on the basis of behavior, because we can only compare the intelligence of us and other animals and robots in terms of how good they are at setting out what it is they need to do.
Thank you.
Questions?
Do you see any advancements in terms of biology for robotics? At the moment it's all mechanical and electronic.
I see.
Do you see anything in terms of biology?
Yes. The chances are that there's a dozen people in this audience who are cyborgs. That is, cybernetic organisms, people who are partly biological, partly mechanical. 1 in 17 people in the UK who are over 65 have an artificial hip. 1 in 10 of people in the UK over 75 have either an artificial pacemaker or an artificial I can't remember the figures, I have the slides, but there are a very, very large number of people in the UK and many other advanced countries who are partly mechanical. Now, artificial hearts are getting sufficiently good that perhaps in 10, 15 years' time, they will say to somebody like me, type A personality, too much coffee, too much work, probably going to kill yourself soon. Your heart has got a life expectancy at your age of another 5 years. This mechanical heart has a life expectancy of 50 years. If I were you, I'd have a transplant now before you go. So that is almost certainly going to happen in advanced countries, countries that can afford it. The other thing is the computing power I've skated over is going to run out in about the year 2000 because there are limits to silicon. But the American government have just put $450 million into quantum computing. and they've put a few $1 million into DNA and molecular computing, because DNA is very good at information processing. And there is no reason why you shouldn't make DNA just for information processing. So computers of, now if we run out of silicon computers, the next generation is probably superconducting computers. The next generation after that is probably optical computers. Then probably molecular computers, possibly after that DNA computers, and possibly, there's one I've left out. Sorry? Quantum computing. So another experiment that's interesting is the Japanese have implanted into a cockroach electrodes from a microprocessor. So they have the cockroach, which is microprocessor controlled. Now, a few years ago, when I started this lecture tour a couple of years ago, it was impossible to make repairs to human nerve endings. That has been done, and now people are making silicon connections to human nerves. And we are getting artificial ears, cochlear implants. Robots are getting much more like humans. If you can imagine the Venn diagram of robot components, the Venn diagram of human components, they're crossing. We are getting more like robots. Robots are getting much more like us.
You have talked about the progress in the processor, and which are wonderful and great. But what about the energy in the mobile robot? Because it seems not to have the same progress as a microprocessor.
Right. In a sense, nobody's bothered, because of what our robot does when it senses that its battery is low. It walks off, or at least it rolls off, towards the nearest power point, and it just charges itself up. That's technically very simple to do. It's no problem. Humans and animals are very efficient at changing food into energy. But they're still not as good as the Viking robot, which is exploring space, which doesn't need, I need an energy recharge. I need a meal every 3 hours, or 5 hours. Otherwise, I'm finished. Blood sugar level, I'm anybody's. No, I shouldn't say that, should I? One drink and is anybody's. Humans can't live very long without food, and even less long without water. But the very best robots, the ones used for exploring outer space, are going for 5-10 years without energy replacement. Not because of solar panels, because they are now so far away from the sun that the solar energy is too weak. They're doing it because they're nuclear powered. To the right? Oh.
I have a more kind of philosophical question there. Well, as following the defeat of Karpov with an IBM computer, we can definitely say today that already computers are better strategically, from a strategical point of view, than the human mind. Now, this, of course, will increase exponentially, as you've shown, during the future years. However, we're talking about strategy, which is basically taking some premises and getting some conclusions by exploring an environment. Now, the human mind exceeds this kind of calculation in the way that, well, as Gödel proved it, computers work by a finite, calculable environment. So that means whatever is calculable is finite, and to the calculus of predicates. Now, the human mind seems to exceed that by an additional element, which is probably feelings, or whatever you want to call it. So people call it the soul, or whatever you want to call it. But there is something unknown that prevails in human compared to computers. Now the question is, to link back to the book that you were mentioning before, I mean, will this element give us an advantage tomorrow compared to an infinitely powerful strategical brain?
Whenever I get a long and complicated question, I'm tempted to ask you to repeat the question. I apologize that because I made such good friends with this gentleman because he's been such a generous host, and I must compliment you and thank you very much for the generosity of your time this last few days. Right. Humans have a lot of problems. We have problems of territoriality. We like to invade other people's countries and take their stuff away. We like to, if the other guy's got a nicer looking wife, we like to pinch them and so forth. We are over-aggressive. We are over-acquisitive. We have a lot of problems associated with the fact we are evolved through some rather nasty creatures like lizards and dinosaurs and all sorts of reptiles and various horrible things. Robots won't have that problem. Robots have the problem that we are building them because they're useful and they do what we tell them. So, for example, we totally depend on our bank's computer. We're totally dependent on the internet computers. We're totally dependent on the telephone computers. No aeroplane will ever be built again which is not computer controlled. The first computer-controlled aircraft, I think, was an analog computer-controlled aircraft, the Concorde, fly-by-wire. Actually, I've always wondered about fly-by-wire. They must have some very long wires. So, a few years ago, an aeroplane would have 3 computers on board, and they would vote. And if the pilot didn't like what the computer said, he overrode the computers. Nowadays, if you get in a modern aeroplane, the pilot cannot override the computers, but the computer can override the pilot. Now, that is partly to make the aeroplane easier to fly. In fact, some pilots say that aeroplanes are now so easy to fly, the only people you need to fly them are a man and a dog. You need a man there to feed the dog, and the dog to bite the man if he touches the controls. So what's going to happen is the robots are going to get better and better at things that are safety critical. For example, in the UK, we've done something like 300 brain operations by robot, something like 400 hip replacement operations by robot, something like 600 prostate cancer operations by robot, because they are so much safer than surgeons. So problems we have with having too much to drink the night before, having an argument with your wife, and then you're on the way to the airport to fly your plane, and you ring up your mistress, and she has an argument with you, and then you get fed up with that, so you ring up your girlfriend, and she has an argument with you, and you've just found that your daughter has gone off to a hippie commune, and your son is let down your tires, and he's going to fly you in a 747. Which do you choose? You have a robot flying it. There was a question from behind there, a lady there. The lady behind you? Right. I mean, this is my ambition, is that my memory, I could use a few more gigabytes of memory. In particular, an accurate one. I can remember all sorts of useful things like the lyrics to a 30-year-old pop song, but I can't remember when somebody says take the second right, then the fourth left. I mean, it irritates me that. So, yes, I could use a silicon transplant, not the same ones that are popular in Hollywood, you understand. So I can see that happening. That is technically possible now because human nerves can interface with silicon microprocessors. It is technically possible now, yes.
I'm interested in the motoric aspects of intelligence of robots, like moving the legs around and climbing up the stairs. What do you think about with the possibility of passing the Turing test for
Right.
intelligent creatures?
Right. Passing the Turing test for robots. Perhaps, I don't know whether to say a brief word about what the Turing test is. The argument is that people used to say, well, this machine cannot be intelligent because it doesn't look like us and it doesn't act like us and it's not physically interacting with us. So Alan Turing, the mathematician, suggested, suppose you communicate with the computer by a keyboard and you can't see what the machine is, and if you cannot tell whether your communication is with a machine or with somebody who's intelligent, then by definition the machine must be intelligent as the human. Roughly speaking, that's the Turing test. So if a machine can pass the Turing test, then it must be considered intelligent. And of course, all the people out there are changing the goalposts all the time. At one time, it was thought that you needed serious intelligence to play chess and to beat humans. And as soon as the computers beat humans at chess, they said, oh, well, no, that's different. We've moved the goalposts. I think an equally good question is, how many humans would pass the Turing test? I have some of us in education, and I hasten to add, I'm not one of them looking at the high level of intelligence of this audience, that suspect that in some aspects of education, human evolution is going backwards. But that's a personal view from education. Beating the Turing test, I don't think is a huge problem. In many areas, machines far outstrip humans. And in fact, in almost all areas, chess playing, maze solving, mathematics, logic, statistics, almost everything which doesn't require a large body of common sense type knowledge, computers have beaten us. Would you want to make a robot that is good in social situations? All right. I suspect that may not happen, but simply because nobody would want to put the funds into it and it wouldn't be terribly useful anyway. You really want a robot which will do what it's told. You don't want a robot which will say, no, I don't feel like doing that today. You wash your own socks.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have to stop at some point because we could probably continue this for several days. And we have to let the speaker, I think, get some rest. So that he will be able to perform as well as his robot tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Well, extremely successful.
How many people do you think we have?